The Velith Collective had watched humanity for nearly 10 years, and in all that time, they had never once felt impressed by what they saw. These strange creatures from the small blue world, called Earth, were loud and violent and messy in ways that made the Velith shake their heads in disappointment. They fought wars over lines drawn on maps that meant nothing to anyone else in the galaxy. They poisoned their own air and water while arguing about whether such poison was even real. They spent vast amounts of resources building weapons to point at each other instead of reaching for the star. Scout Commander Thylix had studied the humans more than most members of the collective, and he had reached a simple conclusion that he shared with anyone who would listen. These creatures were not a threat. They were barely even interesting. The Velith had existed as a spacefaring civilization for over 12,000 years, and in that time they had encountered hundreds of species across the galaxies. Some had been worthy of respect and careful diplomacy. Others had been dangerous enough to require military action, but most had been like the humans, young and foolish, and so focused on their own internal problems that they posed no challenge to anyone but themselves. Fit on the command deck of his research vessel, the Infinite Inquiry, and looked at the holographic display showing the human ship they had been tracking for the past 3 days. It was called the UN's Perseverance, a mid-sized military vessel that the humans classified as a destroyer to Velith. Eyes, it looked like a primitive metal box strapped to engines that burned chemical fuel like something from ancient history. The weapons were projectile-based, which meant they threw chunks of metal at high speeds rather than using proper energy beams. The shields were barely worth mentioning. Simple magnetic fields that would collapse under any serious attack, and the computer systems were so basic that Thylix felt almost embarrassed for the humans who had built them. "Commander," said Specialist Kath from his station near the back of the deck, "I have completed my analysis of the target vessel." Thylix turned to face his most trusted team member, a younger Velith with bright orange markings on his carapace that indicated his family's long history of scientific achievement. "Tell me what you have found." "The ship carries approximately 340 crew members according to their internal communications," Kath reported while scrolling through data on his screen. "Their primary armament consists of 6 railgun batteries and 12 missile tubes, along with point defense systems for intercepting incoming projectiles." "Anything unexpected?" Thylix asked, though he already knew the answer. "Nothing at all, Commander. And the security systems protecting their data networks are quite simple by our standards." Thylix clicked his mandibles together in what passed for a smile among his species. This was exactly what he had expected, and exactly what High Command wanted to hear. The Velith Collective had a long tradition of gathering intelligence on younger species before making any decisions about formal contact. They would slip into computer systems and download everything they could find. They would study weapons and defenses and communication methods. They would learn the strengths and weaknesses of a species before anyone even knew they were being watched. It was efficient and practical, and had served the collective well for thousands of years. The humans would be no different. "Prepare the infiltration team," Thylix ordered as he walked toward the main view screen. "We will conduct a standard probe of their vessel tonight when their night cycle begins and most of the crew is sleeping." "Yes, Commander," Kath replied with a respectful bow of his head. The plan was simple because it did not need to be complicated. The Velith possessed phase shift technology that allowed them to pass through solid matter like ghosts walking through walls. They would slip through the hull of the human ship without triggering any alarms. They would access the computer systems and download everything from weapon specifications to crew records to communication logs, and then they would leave without anyone ever knowing they had been there. Thylix had done this exact operation dozens of times before with other species. The primitives never noticed anything. They went about their simple lives completely unaware that their deepest secrets had been stolen in the night. "Commander." Another officer called out from the sensor station. "I am detecting some unusual energy readings from the human vessel." Thylax frowned, which looked quite strange on a face covered in hard plates and compound eyes. "What kind of readings?" "I am not certain," the officer admitted with obvious frustration in her voice. "The readings appeared for just a moment and then vanished. I cannot find any explanation in our database. Probably just interference from their primitive reactor systems." Thylax decided after a moment of thought. Human technology is so inefficient that it leaks energy in all directions like a broken container. The officer nodded and returned to her work. Apparently satisfied with this explanation, Flix felt no concern at all because there was nothing about humans that warranted concern. They were young and weak and completely unaware that they were being watched by a civilization far older and more advanced than their own. The infiltration would proceed exactly as planned 6 hours later. When the human ship had dimmed its lights for the night cycle, Thylax gathered his team in the deployment chamber. There were 6 of them in total, each wearing specialized suits that would maintain their phase shift fields and keep them invisible. To human eyes and sensors, Keth would handle the computer systems. 2 others would scan the weapons and engines. Remaining 3 would serve as lookouts and backup. This should take no more than 12 rotations. Thylax told his team as they prepared to depart. "The humans are primitive and their security is weak, so we will be in and out before anyone notices our presence." The team acknowledged his words with silent nods. They'd all done this before, and they all expected it to be routine. Thylax activated his phase shift field and felt the familiar tingling sensation as his body became partially out of sync with normal space. He could see his own hands becoming slightly transparent, like looking at something through murky water. "Begin the operation," he commanded, one by one. The team members stepped through the hull of the Infinite Inquiry and floated across the empty space toward the human ship. They passed through the metal walls of the Perseverance as easily as walking through fog. The interior of the human vessel looked exactly as primitive as was. Thylax had expected the corridors were narrow and cramped with exposed pipes and cables running along the ceiling. The lighting was harsh and artificial with none of the soft bioluminescence that civilized species preferred. Everything smelled of recycled air and machine oil and the strange organic scent that humans apparently produced constantly from their soft skin. Thylax felt a moment of pity for any species that had to live in such conditions. No wonder the humans were always fighting each other. When they were trapped in metal boxes like this, the team moved through the ship in practiced silence, their phase-shifted bodies passing through walls and doors without resistance. They reached the main computer core within minutes, and Keth immediately began his work. "I am accessing their primary database now," Keth reported through the neural link that connected the team. "Their encryption is quite basic and should not take long to break." Thylax nodded. Even though no one could see the gesture, everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Humans were sleeping peacefully in their quarters, completely unaware that their ship was being invaded by beings they could not even see. A few hours, this would all be over, and the Velith would have everything they needed to complete their assessment of humanity. Thylax allowed himself to feel satisfied with a job well done. He had no way of knowing that the job had not even begun. He had no way of knowing that everything he thought he understood about humans was completely and terribly wrong, and he had no way of knowing that somewhere in the depths of the ship, hidden behind walls that his scanners could not penetrate, 300 human soldiers were waiting in perfect silence with weapons ready and smiles on their faces. Specialist Keth worked quickly at the human computer terminal, his phase-shifted fingers passing through the physical controls while his specialized equipment interfaced directly with the electronic systems beneath. The data flowed into his extraction device like water pouring into a cup. Gigabytes of information that would take weeks to fully analyze. Ship schematics and crew records and communication, logs and weapons specifications all poured into the Velith storage systems. It was almost too easy, Commander. Keth said through the neural link. I am encountering something strange in the data. Thylix moved closer to his specialist, his transparent form gliding through a bulkhead without resistance. What have you found? The ship schematics do not match what we are seeing, Keth explained with confusion clear in his mental voice. According to these files, there should be a corridor on the other side of this wall. But my scanners show only solid metal. Thylix frowned behind his faceplate. This was unusual, but not necessarily alarming. Perhaps the humans modified their ship after these records were created, he suggested. Their construction methods are crude enough that such changes would be common. Perhaps, Keth agreed, though he did not sound convinced. But there are many such discrepancies, Commander. And the weapon systems listed in the database do not match the locations I scanned earlier. One of the lookouts, a young female named Sithx, interrupted through the neural link. Commander, I am detecting more life signs than we expected. Thylix felt a chill run through his body despite the temperature controls in his suit. How many more? The database says 340 crew members, Sithx reported. But I am now reading over 600 biological signatures on this ship. That was impossible. The Velith had scanned this vessel for 3 days and never detected more than the expected number. Their sensors were the most advanced in the known galaxy, and they did not make mistakes. Run the scan again, Thylix ordered. I have run it 4 times already, Commander, and the result is the same each time. The team stood in silence for a long moment, each of them processing this information, and none of them liking what it meant. Thylix made a decision that he hoped he would not regret. Continue the extraction, he commanded. We came here for data, and we will complete our mission regardless of these anomalies. Keth returned to his work, but his movements were faster now, and his posture had shifted from relaxed confidence to nervous tension. The other team members spread out through the nearby compartments, their scanners working overtime to understand what was happening around. Thylix moved to a window that looked out into one of the main corridors of the human ship. Everything appeared normal. From the outside, human crew members walked past in their simple uniforms, talking to each other about mundane things like food and sleep schedules and entertainment programs. None of them showed any sign of alarm or awareness that they were being watched, but something was wrong. Thylix could feel it in his bones, like a vibration too low to hear, but strong enough to notice. Commander, Keth said suddenly, I have discovered something very troubling in the data. What is it? These files are not real, Keth explained with growing horror in his voice. The encryption I broke was too easy. The data is too clean, and the timestamps do not match the file creation dates. Thylix turned to face his specialist. What are you saying? I am saying that someone created these files specifically for us to find, Commander. And that means the lights in the compartment changed from white to red. Every display screen on the walls flickered and then showed the same image. A simple text message in the Velith language. WL Sejome to the Uns Perseverance'u have been expecting you. Voice came through the ship's intercom system. Calm and clear and speaking perfect Velith with only a slight human accent. Attention, unidentified intruders. You have entered a designated containment zone of the United Nations Navy Counterintelligence Division. Thylix felt his heart pounding in his chest as the voice continued. Your phase shift signatures were detected approximately 14 hours ago when you first began observing this vessel. And tracking of your movements has been ongoing since that time. 14 hours. That was impossible. The Velith phase shift technology was undetectable by any known sensor system in the galaxy. No species had ever seen through it in 12,000 years of use. You are currently located in compartment 7 of deck 4. The voice continued. All exits from this compartment have been sealed with phase-resistant barriers that your technology cannot penetrate. Thylax spun toward the nearest wall and tried to pass. Through it, his body stopped as if he had walked into solid stone. He tried another wall with the same result. The humans had somehow created barriers that blocked phase shift technology, something that should have been impossible for any species to develop without centuries of research. Please remain calm and do not attempt to resist, the human voice said with what sounded almost like amusement. Hostile action will be met with appropriate response, but cooperation will be rewarded with fair treatment. The team clustered together in the center of the compartment. Their invisible forms pressed close in a defensive formation that would do nothing against an enemy they could not see or fight. Commander, Sithix whispered. What do we do? Thylax had no answering. 200 years of service to the collective. He had never once been trapped by an enemy. He had never even imagined that such a thing was possible. The humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be ignorant of galactic civilization. They were supposed to be easy targets for a standard intelligence operation. Instead, they had somehow turned the tables completely. They had known the Velith were coming. They had prepared a trap with technology that should not exist, and now they had captured an elite infiltration team without firing a single shot. I believe we made a serious miscalculation, Keth said quietly. That might have been the greatest understatement in Velith history. A door opened on the far side of the compartment. A door that had not been there moments before. Human soldiers poured through the opening. Dozens of them in heavy armor with weapons that glowed with unfamiliar energy signatures. They moved with perfect coordination, spreading out to cover every angle and every possible escape route. But the most terrifying part was not their weapons or their numbers or their obvious training. The most terrifying part was that they were all smiling on behalf of the United Nations Navy, said a human woman who stepped forward from the group. I want to welcome you to Earth space. She wore a different uniform than the soldiers, darker and more formal, with symbols on her collar that indicated high rank. Her face was calm and her eyes were sharp and intelligent, watching the invisible Velith as if she could see them clearly. My name is Commander Sarah Chun, she continued, and I will be handling your case from this point forward. Thylax found his voice somehow. You cannot see us, he said, hoping desperately that this was true. You are correct, Chun replied with a slight nod. But we can detect your energy signatures with perfect accuracy. And the compartment you were standing in is designed to make phase-shifted beings very uncomfortable if they do not cooperate. She pressed something on her wrist device. The air around the Velith team began to vibrate at a frequency that made their phase shift fields flicker and spark pain. Shot through Thylax's body like electricity. Not enough to cause real damage, but more than enough to make a point. Drop your phase shifts and show yourselves, Chun commanded. Or I will increase the frequency until your fields collapse on their own. Which I am told is extremely unpleasant. Thylax looked at his team, saw the fear in their eyes even through their transparent forms, and made the only decision he could make. He deactivated his phase shift and became visible to human eyes for the first time. The soldiers did not react with surprise or alarm. They simply adjusted their aim to point directly at him, as if they had known exactly where he was standing the entire time. One by one, the rest of the team became visible. Chun smiled again, and this time, Thylax thought he understood the expression. It was not cruelty or malice, it was satisfaction. The quiet pleasure of a predator who had successfully caught her prey. Welcome to the real universe, she said softly. I think you will find it very different from what you expected." Commander Sarah Chun had waited 3 years for this moment. 3 years of planning and preparation and patience. 3 years of pretending to be a simple patrol vessel, while actually serving as the most elaborate trap ever constructed by human. And the UNS Perseverance was not a real destroyer. It had never been a real destroyer from the day its construction began in the orbital shipyards above Luna. It had been designed for one purpose, and one purpose only. It was a honeypot. A fake target meant to attract exactly the kind of attention that the Veloth had given it and stood on the real bridge of the ship, hidden behind walls of phase-resistant material that no alien scanner had ever detected. The room was larger and more advanced than anything the Veloth had seen in their stolen data, filled with holographic displays and control systems that represented the cutting edge of human technology. Status report. She called out to her crew. All 6 intruders are now in custody. Lieutenant Park reported from his station. Phase shift fields have been neutralized and they are being moved to holding cells as we speak. And their mothership? Still holding position 3,000 kilometers out, Commander. And their captain appears to be panicking based on the communications we are intercepting. Chun allowed herself a small smile. She had spent countless hours studying the Veloth, learning their language and their culture and their psychology. She knew exactly what they were thinking right now. The Veloth believed themselves to be the masters of stealth and deception. They had spent thousands of years slipping into the ships of other species and stealing their secrets without ever being caught. The idea that someone could turn that technique against them had simply never occurred to them. It was a blind spot, and Chun had driven a truck through it, open a channel to the alien vessel. She ordered Park worked his controls for a moment. Channel open, Commander, and we have broken their encryption so they cannot hide from us. Chun stepped forward and spoke in the Veloth language. A pronunciation perfect after years of secret study. Attention Veloth Vessel Infinite Inquiry. This is Commander Chun of the ONS Perseverance. She paused to let the words sink in. We have captured your infiltration team, and we have complete awareness of your current position and capabilities. So I strongly suggest you listen carefully to what I am about to say. The response came after a long moment of silence. The voice of a Veloth captain who was clearly struggling to maintain composure. This is Captain Vexith of the Infinite Inquiry, and I demand to know how you have done this impossible thing. You demand nothing, Chun replied calmly. Your cloaking field is currently being painted by 17 separate targeting systems, and at my command any one of them can put a hole through your hull large enough to walk through. Another long silence. What do you want? Vexith finally asked. I want you to drop your cloak and prepare for boarding, Chun said. Your crew will be treated fairly, and your ship will not be damaged if you cooperate. But if you attempt to flee or resist, I will demonstrate exactly what human weapons are capable. The bridge crew watched the sensor displays with tense anticipation. Everyone knew that the next few seconds would determine whether this encounter ended peacefully or violently. Captain Vexith made his decision. The Infinite Inquiry suddenly accelerated, its engines flaring bright as it turned away from the human ship and tried to run Chun's side. She had hoped the alien captain would be smart enough to surrender, but she had prepared for this possibility as well. One shot, she ordered. Disable their engines, but do not destroy the ship. The weapons officer worked his controls with practiced efficiency. A single railgun, mounted on the hidden spine of the Perseverance, aligned itself with the fleeing alien vessel. The gun fired a tungsten slug the size of a human fist, accelerated to 3% of the speed of light in less than a second. At that velocity it crossed the 3,000 kilometers between the ships almost instantly. The round struck the Infinite Inquiry exactly where the weapons officer had aimed, punching through the engine block and destroying the primary thrust systems without touching any other part of the ship. The alien vessel went dark and began to drift, completely powerless and helpless. Target disabled, the weapons officer reported with obvious satisfaction. No secondary damage and life signs are stable. Chun nodded. Launch boarding parties. And remind them that we want prisoners, not casualties. Shuttles detached from the hidden bays of the Perseverance and raced toward the crippled alien ship. Each shuttle carried a team of Marines trained specifically for zero-gravity combat and alien vessel boarding operations. They had practiced this scenario hundreds of times in simulation. Now they would do it for real. Chun turned to Lieutenant Park. Connect me to the holding cells where we are keeping the infiltration team. Connection established. Commander. The main view screen changed to show the interior of a detention area where 6 Velith sat behind energy barriers. Their leader, the one called Thylix based on the intelligence they had gathered, stood apart from the others with an expression that might have been shock or disbelief. Scout Commander Thylix, Chun said. I wanted you to see this. She gestured, and the screen split to show the Infinite Inquiry being surrounded by human shuttles. Your captain tried to run, she explained. He failed. And now your entire crew is being taken into custody. Thylix stared at the screen with his compound eyes wide. How? He managed to say, how did you know we were watching you? And how did you develop technology to counter our phase shift systems? Chun smiled. I could tell you that we are simply more clever than you expected. But that would not be the whole truth. She stepped closer to the screen, her face filling the display. The truth is that we have known about the Velith Collective for 6 years now. Ever since we captured one of your probes that was studying our colony on Mars. Thylix made a sound that might have been a gasp. We kept that capture secret. Chun continued. We studied your technology and learned your language and figured out how your phase shift systems worked. And then we built countermeasures, she said with undisguised pride. We developed sensors that could detect your infiltration teams and barriers that could trap them, and weapons that could destroy your ships. But you never attacked us, Thylix said with confusion in his voice. Why would we attack you? Chun asked. You were not a threat as long as we knew you were watching. And every moment you spent observing. US was a moment we could spend learning about. You. The realization dawned slowly on Thylix's alien face. You let us watch you. He said. You wanted us to think you were primitive and weak. We wanted to know who was interested in humanity. Chun corrected. There are many species in this galaxy, and not all of them are friendly. So we needed to understand who was watching before we could decide how to respond. And now you know. Now we know? Chun agreed. The Velith Collective has been studying us for a decade, which means they are cautious and careful and prefer intelligence gathering to open warfare. She paused. That tells me your species might be worth talking to. Thylix blinked several times, his compound eyes catching the light. You want to talk? He asked incredulously. You have captured our ship and our crew and demonstrated military capabilities we did not believe possible. And now you want to have a conversation? Of course, Chun said as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. Fighting is expensive and messy, and usually leaves both sides worse off than before. We would rather have allies than enemies, Scout Commander, and we would rather have trade partners than targets. But none of that can happen until both sides understand each other, she concluded. So yes, we want to talk, and we want to listen, and we want to find out if there is a way for our species to work together instead of against each other. Thylix stood in silence for a long moment around him. His team members watched with expressions of varying confusion and fear and something that might have been hope. I do not have the authority to speak for the collective, Thylix finally said. I know. Chen replied. But you have the authority to recommend. And your recommendations will carry weight after what has happened here today. She let that sink in before continuing. Think about it, Scout Commander, and think carefully, because the next time we meet, it will either be as friends or as enemies. And I suspect you now understand which option would be better for everyone involved. The screen went dark, leaving Thylix and his team alone with their thoughts and their fears and the growing realization that everything they had believed about humans was completely and utterly wrong. The holding cell was not what Thylix had expected when he had imagined being captured by a primitive species. He had pictured dark dungeons and crude restraints and the kind of brutal treatment that young civilizations typically showed to their enemies instead. He found himself in a clean room with comfortable seating and proper temperature controls and even a food dispenser that produced meals compatible with Velith biology. The humans had clearly studied his species very carefully, too. Days had passed since the capture. 2 days of waiting and wondering and trying to understand how everything had gone so terribly wrong. His team members had been separated into individual cells for questioning, but no one had reported any mistreatment. The humans asked questions about Velith society and technology and military capabilities, and they seemed genuinely interested in the answers rather than simply trying to extract intelligence. It was strange and confusing, and completely unlike anything Thylix had been trained to expect on the third day. The door to his cell opened, and Commander Chun walked in. She carried a small device in one hand and 2 cups of steaming liquid in the other. "Good morning, Scout Commander," she said, in nearly perfect Velith. "I brought you something called coffee, which is a drink that humans use to stimulate our minds." She set 1 cup in front of Thylix and kept the other for herself. "I do not know if it will have the same effect on your biology, but I thought the gesture might be appreciated." Thylix looked at the dark liquid with suspicion. "Why are you being kind to us?" he asked. "We came to infiltrate your ship and steal your secrets, and yet you treat us like honored guests rather than enemies." Chun sat down across from him and took a sip of her coffee. "Because you are not our enemies," she said simply. "You are representatives of a species we want to understand, and treating you badly would only make that understanding harder to achieve." "That seems very practical. Humans are practical creatures." Chun agreed. "We learned long ago that cruelty creates more problems than it solves, and that enemies you treat with respect are more likely to become friends." She pulled out the device she had brought and placed it on the table between them. A holographic display flickered to life, showing images that Thylix recognized instantly. They were Velith intelligence reports, the same documents that he had read dozens of times during his preparation for this mission. But these copies had been annotated with human notes and corrections, marking errors and misconceptions and outright falsehoods. "Your species has been studying us for 10 years, Chum said. "In that time you have gathered thousands of reports and analyzed millions of data points and formed conclusions about human society and human capabilities." She tapped the display and a new set of images appeared. Almost all of those conclusions were wrong. Thylix leaned forward to study the annotated reports. The humans had marked sections where Velith analysts had underestimated human technology, where they had misunderstood human psychology, where they had made assumptions based on incomplete information. It was embarrassing to see how many mistakes his people had made. "You saw our wars and our violence and our internal conflicts," Chun continued. "You saw us fighting each other over territory and resources and ideology, and you concluded that we were a primitive and self-destructive species. Were we wrong to think that?" Thylix asked. "No," Chun admitted. "Humans are violent and we do fight each other far more than we should. But you missed the most important part of that observation," she said with a slight smile. "We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years, which means we have had 10,000 years of practice." She leaned back in her chair and gestured at the walls around them. Every piece of technology on this ship exists because humans were trying to kill other humans more efficiently. Our weapons were designed to defeat other human weapons. Our tactics were developed to counter other human tactics. Our defenses were built to survive attacks from enemies who thought exactly like we do. Thylix felt a chill run through his body as he began to understand what Chun was saying. You are telling me that your species is experienced at war in ways that we are not. I am telling you that war is in our blood, Chun replied. We hate it, and we wish it were not true. But we cannot deny what we are. The Velith have existed as a peaceful civilization for thousands of years. She continued. You solve your conflicts through negotiation and compromise and careful diplomacy, which is admirable and wise. But it also means that when you encounter a species like ours, you have no idea what you are dealing with. She stood up and walked to the window that looked out into the corridor. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy, she said. We are not the smartest or the most advanced or the most numerous, but we may be the most dangerous, because we have spent our entire history learning how to survive against enemies who want to destroy us. And now that we know there are other species out there watching us, she turned back to face Thylix. We have turned all of that experience and all of that paranoia outward. Thylix sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. The coffee cup sat untouched in front of him, the steam rising in gentle spirals. What do you want from the collective? He finally asked. Chun returned to her seat. We want peace, she said. We want trade and diplomatic relations and cultural exchange, and all the things that civilized species do when they meet each other. But we also want respect, she added. We want your people to understand that humanity is not a species to be studied from the shadows and manipulated from a distance. We are your equals, Scout Commander, and we expect to be treated as such. Thylix nodded slowly. I believe I understand. But I must ask you something that has been troubling me since my capture. Ask, why did you let us go? Thylix said, you captured our ship and our crew and demonstrated capabilities that we cannot match. But you have told me that you intend to release us. Why would you give up such an advantage? Chun smiled, and this time Thylix thought he could see genuine warmth in the expression. Because keeping you prisoner serves no purpose, she explained. We have already learned everything we need to know about Velith technology from your ship, and holding your crew would only create hostility between our species. By releasing you, we send a message that we prefer cooperation over conflict, and by sending you home with full knowledge of what happened here, she continued, we ensure that your people understand exactly what they are dealing with. That seems like a risk, Thylix observed. If we tell the collective about your capabilities, they may decide to attack you before you become too strong to stop. They might. Chun agreed, but I do not think they will. She pulled out another device and handed it to Thylix. This contains a complete technical readout of every Velith military vessel class, annotated with theoretical human countermeasures. Thylix stared at the device in disbelief. You are giving us information about our own ships that we did not know you had. We are showing you that we already know everything, Chun said. We could have attacked your fleets at any time in the past 6 years. And we chose not to. We are choosing peace, Scout Commander. And this is our way of proving it. Thylix held the device carefully, as if it might explode in his hands. You are either the wisest species I have ever encountered, he said slowly, or the most insane. Probably a little of both, Chun admitted with a laugh. That is another thing humans are good at, being multiple contradictory things at the same time. She stood up and extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting and farewell. Your ship will be repaired within the week, and you will be free to return home. I hope the next time we meet, it will be under better circumstances." Thylix looked at her hand, then reached out with his own clawed appendage and grasped it carefully. "I hope so as well, Commander Chun, and I thank you for the coffee." Even though I did not drink it, Chun laughed again. "Perhaps next time you will try it. And perhaps by then we will have learned to make something that tastes better to Velith." "That would be a good sign of cooperation," Thylix agreed. "A small thing, but meaningful. The best relationships are built on small things," Chun said. "Remember that when you speak to your leaders." "Scout Commander, I will remember everything about this experience," Thylix promised, "and I suspect my people will never look at humans the same way again." The Infinite Inquiry limped back to Velaspace 3 weeks after the incident, its engines repaired by human technicians, who had worked with surprising care and skill. Thylix stood on the bridge and watched as the familiar stars of home appeared on the view screen. Should have felt relieved to be back in safe territory, but instead he felt only a deep sense of unease. Everything he had known about the universe had changed, and he was not sure how to process that change. The High Command had summoned him immediately upon his return. Every member of the Collective's ruling council wanted to hear his report in person, which told Thylix that the implications of his mission had not been lost on anyone. He arrived at the Great Hall in the capital city of Velith Prime and found himself standing before 20 of the most powerful individuals in his civilization. They sat in a curved arrangement that surrounded the speaker's platform, their compound eyes fixed on him with intense focus. "Scout Commander Thylix," the High Arbiter said in a formal tone, "you may begin your report." Thylix took a deep breath and started from the beginning. Told them about the initial observation of the human ship, about the confidence with which he had approached the mission, about the certainty that the humans were primitive and easily fooled. He told them about the trap that had been waiting, about the phase-resistant barriers and the countermeasures, and the precision with which the humans had sprung their ambush. He told them about Commander Chun and her calm authority, about the conversations they had shared, about the data package she had given him containing information to prove the humans had been watching the Velith as closely as the Velith had been watching them. When he finished speaking, the Great Hall fell silent. The council members looked at each other with expressions of disbelief and concern, and something that might have been fear. "You are telling us," the High Arbiter said slowly, "that the humans have possessed technology capable of detecting and countering our phase shift systems for 6 years, and they never used it against us?" "That is correct, High Arbiter. And you are telling us that they could have destroyed our observation vessels at any time, but they chose to let us continue our surveillance?" "Yes, High Arbiter. And now they have released our crew and our ship without demanding anything in return except that we consider diplomatic relations?" Thylix nodded. "Commander Chun said they wanted respect, High Arbiter, and she said they wanted to be treated as equals rather than as subjects of study." The council members murmured among themselves. "This is unprecedented," one of them said. "No primitive species has ever detected our infiltration teams, let alone captured them and turned them loose with a message of peace." "Perhaps they are not primitive," another council member suggested. "Perhaps we have fundamentally misjudged their capabilities from the beginning." The High Arbiter raised a hand for silence. "Scout Commander Thylix, based on your direct experience with these humans, what is your assessment of their intentions?" Thylix considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe they are sincere, High Arbiter. Commander Chun could have done many things with the advantage she possessed. She could have extracted information through force, or held us for ransom, or used our capture to justify an attack on Velaspace. Instead, she treated us with courtesy and released us with evidence that they desire cooperation. You believe we should trust them? The High Arbiter asked. I believe we should not underestimate them. Thylix replied. The humans are not what we thought they were, and we would be foolish to continue treating them as if nothing has changed. He paused to collect his thoughts. They told me something that I have not been able to forget. They said that their species has been fighting wars for 10,000 years, and that all of their technology and all of their tactics were developed against enemies who thought exactly like they do. They are experienced at conflict in ways that we cannot imagine, and yet they chose to offer friendship instead of violence. The council members absorbed this information with varying degrees of acceptance. Some seemed ready to dismiss the humans as a fluke, a lucky species that had stumbled upon technology they did not truly understand. Others appeared genuinely worried about what this incident meant for Velis security, but a few, including the High Arbiter himself, seemed to see something else entirely. The humans knew we were watching them for 6 years, the High Arbiter said thoughtfully. In that time, they developed countermeasures to our most advanced technology and prepared a trap that succeeded perfectly. And then they let us go with a gift of information that proves their superiority. He stood from his seat and walked toward the speaker's platform where Thylix stood. This is not the behavior of a primitive species. This is the behavior of a civilization that is sophisticated enough to understand that permanent enemies are costly and that potential allies are valuable. What do you propose, High Arbiter? One of the council members asked. I propose that we accept their invitation to talk. The High Arbiter replied. I propose that we send the formal diplomatic mission to Earth and begin the process of establishing relations with humanity as equals. And I propose that we do it quickly, before they decide that our hesitation is a sign of hostile intent. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Velith Collective would send an embassy to Earth, the first official contact between the two species and Scout Commander Thylix, who had been captured and released and who understood the humans better than anyone else in Velis society, would lead the delegation 3 months later. Thylix found himself standing in a spaceport on the human world of Earth. The air smelled strange, and the gravity was slightly different from what he was used to. But the crowd that had gathered to greet him seemed friendly enough. Humans of all sizes and colors stood behind barriers, watching the alien visitors with expressions of curiosity and excitement. And there, waiting at the end of the landing platform, was Commander Sarah Chun. She wore different insignia now. The symbols of a higher rank that Thylix had learned was called Admiral. The promotion made sense given her success in capturing the Velith team, and it meant that she would likely be involved in the diplomatic negotiations going forward. Ambassador Thylix, she said as he approached, using his new title with a slight smile. Welcome to Earth. Thank you. Admiral Chun, Thylix replied. I must admit that I did not expect to return here so soon, or under such different circumstances. Chun laughed. The human sound that Thylix had learned indicated amusement. Life is full of surprises. Ambassador, that is one thing humans and Velith seem to have in common. They walked together toward a waiting vehicle, surrounded by security officers from both species who watched each other with professional wariness. I have a question that has bothered me since we last spoke, Thylix said as they walked. You said that humans prefer peace to war, and yet everything about your species suggests that you are exceptionally good at violence. How do you reconcile those two things? Chun thought about the question for a moment before answering. We are good at violence because we have had no choice, she said. Our history forced us to learn how to fight and how to survive against enemies who wanted to destroy us. But being good at something does not mean you enjoy it. She stopped walking and turned to face Thylix directly. The best warriors understand the cost of war better than anyone, she said. They have seen what it does to people, and to societies, and to the future. That is why they often become the strongest advocates for peace, because they know what happens when peace fails. Thylix considered this perspective. It was very different from the Velith approach, which emphasized avoiding conflict entirely rather than preparing for it, but he could see a certain wisdom in the human way of thinking. You prepare for war so that you can choose peace, he said slowly. That is an interesting philosophy. It is more than philosophy, Chum replied. It is survival. They continued toward the vehicle, and Thylix found himself thinking about the future. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of species with different values and different goals and different ideas about how the universe should be organized. The Velith had tried to navigate that danger through caution and secrecy, watching from the shadows and avoiding direct engagement. The humans had chosen a different path, preparing themselves for the worst while hoping for the best. Perhaps there was room for both approaches to coexist. Perhaps the Velith could learn from human resilience, while the humans learned from Velith wisdom. Perhaps together they could face whatever challenges the galaxy might throw at them. Admiral Chun, Thylix said as they reached the vehicle, I believe this is the beginning of something important. I hope so, Ambassador, Chun replied. The universe is a big place, and it is better to face it with friends than alone. She extended her hand, and this time Thylix took it without hesitation. Somewhere in the distance, hidden beyond the atmosphere and cloaked in shadows, human warships maintained their eternal vigilance. They were watching, always watching, ready to defend their world and their new allies against any threat. But for now, there was peace, and that was enough.